President Wife is pretty and cool. Chapter 6. Goodbye, Batman. Mo Jinrong never showed his appearance to the public and didn't care about the rumors about him. Others couldn't recognize him, but she had imprinted his appearance in her heart. Lan Anran glanced at him sideways, noticing that he was still so cold and unpredictable. In her past life, he had loved her deeply, but didn't reveal anything. Mo Jinrong had a disease that everyone knew about. Whenever he touched a woman, he had angina and experienced life-threatening pain. In her past life, Mo Jinrong never touched her, not even after they got married. In order to save her, he ignored the pain in his body and ended up sacrificing himself. Mo Jinrong walked past her without a single glance. Lan Anran turned and walked towards the ward. Mrs. Land's gentle cry of joy came from the ward as she saw her family. On the hospital bed, Mrs. Land's face was pale, but she had a smile. She grabbed Lan Ting Young's hand and spoke excitedly. Ting Young, why isn't Anne Ran here yet? She'll be in here. Don't worry. Anne Ran is a big girl now. She's tall and slim. Lan Ting Young stretched out his hand and gestured to Lan An's height with a smile. Lan Ann Ran looked at her mother and couldn't help tearing up. Her mother loved her so much. Thinking about the horrible things she did in her past life, she wanted to slap herself. She wiped her tears and opened the door gently. The people in the ward heard the noise and looked towards the door. Sis! Lan Yanran was the first to see Lan Anran. His eyes rolled over and he shouted out. When Mrs. Lan saw Anran, tears overflowed from her eyes. Anran, you're here. Mom, I'm here to see you. Lan Anran walked to the hospital bed slowly and grabbed onto her mother's hand as she spoke. It's good that you're here. Mrs. Lan wiped her tears and took a good look of her daughter. She hadn't seen her in 20 years. Her daughter was indeed slim and beautiful. She was a beauty. Mom, don't cry. What kind of illness do you have? Have you gotten better? Lan Ran wiped her mother's tears tenderly and looked at her with concern. I felt better as soon as you arrived. This is an old ailment. I'm old and will get better with some care. Mrs. Lan spoke extremely gently as her voice was soft because of her illness. The more she looked at Anne Ran, the fonder she grew of her, probably because Anne Ran was sent away at a young age. Even though they were close, there seemed to be something lacking. Mrs. Lan's gaze suddenly dimmed. She thought for a moment before speaking. Anne Ran, don't blame Mom and Dad. Before Mrs. Lan finished speaking, Lan Anran interrupted her. Mom, Dad, I don't blame you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have survived till this day. You should recuperate well now and leave the hospital in good health. When Mrs. Lan heard her daughter's words, the smile on her face brightened and a warmth filled her heart. It was rare for a daughter to be so sensible. Their relationship instantly became closer. Lan Yanran, who was by side, suddenly mentioned the medical exam. You are both enjoying yourselves, but I'm miserable. Mom, Dad, the exams are about to start and I'm definitely going to fail again. Can I transfer to another school? Wrong City Medical Research Institute is too difficult. I won't be able to get in. No, don't forget that you are a medical family. And you are the only boy in the family. You can't embarrass your mom and dad. Study well and get into Wrong City Medical Research Institute so that we can be proud, Lan Ting Young said helplessly. The Lan family had been doctors for generations, and both Lan Ting Young and Mrs. Lan were well-known doctors in the country. Lan Ting Young also had a private traditional Chinese medicine hospital. In the future, it would be inherited by Lan Yanran. How could he not study medicine? The Land family prioritized their reputation, and this was clearly related to the family's reputation. Because of this, old Mrs. Land especially disliked Lan Ting-young. She felt that Lan Ting-young could not make a contribution to the Land family, giving birth to two useless children. Lan Yanran was the Land family's only male offspring, but his aptitude for medicine was mediocre, and he failed every exam. He couldn't bring honor to the Land family. Old Mrs. Land thought he was mentally slow, making her especially unhappy. Lan Yanran pouted in dissatisfaction. He sat aside with his head hung low and whispered, "I bring the class down every exam, and they will mock me for being useless." Sis? Lan Yan suddenly glanced at Lan Anran. His sister was back, and she was also a member of the Lan family. If all the children of the Lan family had to be doctors, does that mean that she? Were they so insane? Lan Yanran looked at his sister with wide eyes. "Sis, are you going too?" Lan Yanran asked with his young voice, his eyes wide open. Mrs. Lan looked up at the girl with a slight smile on her face. Lan Anran's big watery eyes were full of smiles. Mrs. Lan thought that since Lan Anran had been living in the countryside all these years, she wouldn't know traditional Chinese medicine. It would be too difficult for her to enter Rong City Medical Research Institute now. She was better off as an ordinary person. Mrs. Lan said in a deep voice, "Anran, you don't need to. Mom's only wish for you is to grow up happily." Mrs. Lan said with the same thing in her past life. But back then, Lan Anran thought that she was afraid that she would surpass Lan Yanran, so she wanted her to be useless. But now that she thought about it, her mother was indeed thinking for her sake. She just came back and might not be used to city life. So how could she shoulder the Lan family's responsibility? However, Lan Anran had made up her mind. As long as she was around, she would definitely do everything she could. "Mom, you're the best." As Lan Anran said that, she suddenly laid on her mother's thigh. Mrs. Lan was taken aback, but she smiled and stroked Lan Anran's hair. Chapter 7. Herbal Soup. After a month of recuperation, Mrs. Lan's illness finally got better, and her complexion looked much rosier than before. Lan Anran held a bowl of soup. She scooped a spoonful carefully, blew on it, and when it wasn't too hot, she fed her mother. "Anran, what is this? It's so delicious." Mrs. Lan took a sip and smiled brightly. In the past month, Lan Anran had been making different types of soup for her every day, and they were always sweet and delicious. Mrs. Lan enjoyed it very much. "Mom, this is a calming soup I made. Have some more." Lan Anran smiled faintly, then scooped another spoonful. "Sis, you're the best." Lan Yanran stared at Lan Anran brightly and smiled. In his eyes, everything his sister did was beautiful. Every move was ladylike, making it hard to imagine that she was from the countryside. "Of course, Anran is my daughter after all. I'm full of strength now." "Honey, you've recovered so quickly. Previously, even the doctor was at a loss." Lan Tingyong was slightly confused. Previously, his traditional Chinese medicine hospital had tried everything, but nothing had worked, and they ended up transferring her to another hospital. He originally thought there was no more hope. Surprisingly, her illness miraculously improved. "It's because of Anran. I got better after seeing her." Mrs. Lan looked at Lan Anran with joy and smiled. Lan Anran smiled faintly, looking down at the bowl of soup in her hand thoughtfully. The soup consisted of her newly developed medicine and the essence of herbs dug from the countryside. She had been experimenting, but didn't expect it to be effective on her mother's illness. However, if she wanted to completely cure her mother's illness, she would still need one more herb: fennel. The herb was said to grow in extremely harsh environments every 10 years. Its medical properties were very effective, even though it couldn't cure everything. It wouldn't have any problem in keeping her mother healthy. Fennel wasn't available in the market, so she could only take a risk with the black market. She wasn't worried about the price, as she was willing to pay any price for something so good. The doctor said that she can be discharged if there weren't any problems today, Lan Ting said with joy. That's great. I have wanted to go home for a while now. I've had enough of this hospital. Mrs. Lan happily drank the rest of the herbal soup. After Mrs. Lan was discharged from the hospital, Lan Ting was busy dealing with the traditional Chinese medicine hospital and surgeries every day, constantly running about. Lan Yanran was busy with school. After failing the last time, he was ridiculed by his classmates again, and now he didn't dare to walk with his head up high. Lan Anran was the only one who accompanied Mrs. Lan, and when she was free, she would return to the countryside to tend to her herbs and reagents. She had no intention of dealing with old Mrs. Lan. She really didn't want to see that old woman. On this day, Lan Anran was accompanying her mother at home, serving her herbal soup. Just then, the house phone rang. It turned out to be a call from old Mrs. Lan's nanny, wanting Lan Anran to come over immediately. Lan Yanran pouted, appearing very reluctant. Lan Ting felt that old Mrs. Lan must really miss her grandchildren. Hence, he forcefully brought them over. Lan Ting family stood at the door of the house. They knocked for a long time, but no one opened the door. She is clearly making a fool out of us. Why would grandmother miss me? She is awfully trying to intimidate us. Lan Yanran said with dissatisfaction. Yanran, what are you talking about? Lan Ting reproached him, as if it was very rude for children to speak of elders in such a manner. Lan Yanran immediately kept quiet. At this moment, the door finally opened. Old Mrs. Lan's nanny, Madame Wong, spoke respectfully. Old Mrs. Lan was sleeping, but she is awake now. Please come in. Lan Ting thanked her and walked into the hall with his family. Old Mrs. Lan, Zhao Zhumi, was sitting in the middle of the lobby, looking at them with a serious expression. What rare visitors. It took a great deal to arrange a visit. I guess I'm not very important, Zhao Zumi said harshly. Lan Yanran slumped his head and did not dare look up at Zhao Zumi in front of Zhao Zumi. He was very humble, but inside he couldn't accept it at all. Although Lan Yanran was dissatisfied, he didn't say anything. He never dared to voice out his anger. Zhao Zumi saw Lan Ran in one glance. She looked at her briefly and didn't think much of her. She couldn't compare her granddaughter, Lan Yaxin, at all. Zhao Zumi recalled the disasters brought onto the Lan family and the suffering she suffered during the years after Lan Anran was born, making the resentment in her heart intensify. That's not true, Mom. Didn't I visit a month ago? Zhao Zumi glanced at the embarrassed Lan Tingyang again and grew even more furious. He produced a grandson for the Lan family, which was a joyous news for everyone, but this grandson didn't do well and was an embarrassment when he entered the world. The Lan family didn't have good genes, producing a mentally challenged grandson and a granddaughter that jinxed her husband. They made her a laughingstock for many years. Zhao Zumi finally spoke out in anger. Introduce us. Who is this quiet, cold-looking girl? She squinted at Lan Anran with a look of contempt. Lan Tingyang's mother's contemptuous tone made him feel a little uncomfortable. His precious daughter had been in the countryside for 20 years, and now she was back. They couldn't wait to pamper her, but yet she was mocked by his mother. He wasn't very pleased. Lan Anran wasn't affected. She smiled and looked at Zhao Zumi, who was seated directly in front of her. 2 dimples appeared on her cheek, and she spoke with a solemn expression. Grandmother, I am Ayn Rand. I heard that grandfather passed away a few years ago. It's a pity I couldn't see him one last time. But grandmother, don't be sad. Grandfather is accompanying us at all times and might even be watching us right now. Lan Ayn Rand spoke extremely softly, with a slight sorrowful tone and tears welling up in her big, watery eyes. Old Master Lan died of illness a few years ago, and Xiao Zumi had been in poor health because of his passing. She had only just recovered from the illness and had some life left in her face. When Lan Ayn Rand mentioned this, Zhao Shumi's expression suddenly changed, and she was once again reminded of old Master Lan's death. Was she deliberately reminding her that she had become a widow? Chapter 8. Hypocritical Family. Her shrewd eyes looked around in horror, and a chilling sensation ran through her. Her gaze landed on Lan Ayn Rand again. "You insolent girl! How dare you make fun of your grandfather? Ting Young, is this how you taught your daughter?" Zhao Shumi chided her unceremoniously. Lan Ting Young felt uncomfortable as well, and his face grew grim as he reproached Ayn Rand. "Ayn Rand, how could you make fun of your dead grandfather? Hurry up and apologize to your grandmother." "Oh, I'm sorry, Grandma. I shouldn't have made you upset by mentioning my dead grandfather. It's my fault," Lan Ayn Rand said obediently. Zhao Shumi was bothered by her words. She was upset because she mentioned her dead grandfather? But she couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. She swallowed her curse and rolled her eyes at Lan Ayn Rand. "Mom, don't bicker with a child. Be a role model and forgive her," Lan Ting Young persuaded. "This child doesn't respect her elders at all. Ting Young, you should have disciplined her well. She's too much." Zhao Shumi rolled her eyes at Lan Ayn Rand. "Mom, don't be angry. Is there a reason you called us over today?" Lan Ting Young asked with a smile. "Well, this girl has been back for a while, and yet you haven't come to inform me. I have no option but to invite you over. You're getting out of control." Zhao Shumi looked at Lan Ting Young with dissatisfaction and said angrily, "Grandma, why are you angry again? Don't let it affect your health." Lan Yaxin walked downstairs with a grin. When Zhao Shumi finally saw a granddaughter she adored, she smiled. "My health hasn't been well for a long time, and these inophile things have been angering me. Fortunately, I still have a good granddaughter to cheer me up." Zhao Shumi held Lan Yaxin's hand as she spoke. Lan Yaxin raised her head as she caught sight of Lan Ting Young's family. She stepped forward with a fake smile, greeting them one by one. Outsiders would have thought they had a close relationship. Lan Ayn Rand was putting up a front as well with a fake smile. A loud woman's voice came from nearby, and Lan Ayn Rand immediately knew it was Xu Yanshan. "Everyone is here. I'm sorry I'm late. Ting Yu met with a little trouble and couldn't come over, so I'm by myself." Xu Yanshan loved wearing a chesulum paired with a shawl, so he shawshawed over to old Mrs. Lan in her high heels, greeting her with a smile while ignoring Lan Ting Young and his family. Lan Ting Young greeted her, but she ignored him and turned to start a merry conversation with old Mrs. Lan. "Second on, are you Novi Rich? You didn't even acknowledge a greeting. Are you looking down on poor people like us?" Lan Ayn Rand couldn't stand it anymore. Xu Yanshan seemed to have only just noticed a bunch of people standing in front of her. She immediately smiled and apologized. "Look at my poor eyesight. When did you guys come in? Ayn Rand sure has a sharp tongue. If you are poor, what are we? What else could you be? Villains?" Lan and Yan Ran spoke very quietly, but Xu Yanshan caught it. "Yan Ran, children should speak properly. Don't gossip behind other people's back. You will become long-tongued," Xu Yanshan said angrily. Chapter 9. The Furious Countryside Old Lady. "Second aunt, don't you gossip a lot too? You have a really long tongue," Lan said mockingly. "Presumptuous! How dare you speak here? Don't you have any respect for me? Yanshan is your aunt. Is that what your parents taught you? You have no manners." Zhao Shumi seized the opportunity and spoke angrily. Lan Tingyang couldn't endure it anymore and wanted to explain, but was stopped by Zhao Shumi. Did I allow you to speak? Tingyang, why are you becoming so disrespectful? Lan Anran couldn't understand. She had two sons, but why was their treatment so different? Sometimes she wondered if her father was Zhao Shumi's biological son. How else could she treat him so harshly? Lan Anran smiled. Grandma, it's my fault. Please don't blame Dad. Although it was an apology, Zhao Shumi found it uncomfortable. She glanced up and when she saw Anran smile, she slapped the table fiercely. You insolent thing! You don't deserve to speak here. As expected of a wild girl from the countryside, you have no manners. Let me make this clear. The Lan family is not from the countryside. You will have to be respectful in both your words and your actions. If your parents don't teach you the rules, I will. Lan Yaxin watched the scene from behind triumphantly. She never expected Lan Anran to have this day. Scold her. Continue to scold her. It's best if you beat her to death. Grandmother, you keep saying that I'm from the countryside. Do you despise people from the countryside? Grandmother, the food that you eat, the clothes that you wear, and the toilet paper you use are all made from people from the countryside. If you despise people from the countryside, don't use those things, Lan Anran retorted. You, country girl, how dare you rebut me? Zhao Shumi's angry eyes widened and she stomped her feet, pointing to Lan Anran while yelling, You horrible girl! I won't have a granddaughter like you! You, get out of here! She pointed at Lan Anran's nose and cursed. Xu Yanshan, who stood at the side, was watching the show triumphantly. During this period, she couldn't help pleading with Zhao Shumi to show her good personality. Mom, don't get angry. Anran was being silly. Since she just saw you, forgive her. As the situation escalated, Lan Tingyang wanted to speak but was stopped by Lan Anran. She spoke calmly. Grandma, am I wrong? You look down on people from the countryside, but you wear clothes they make and eat food that they cook. I am a country girl. I don't know how I offended you or how I made you upset. I know that you despise me because I'm from the countryside. But I want to say that the Lan family rules are old, and what you say may not always be right. There are also no laws that say I can't tell the truth. You shut up, you're rebelling. You're rebelling, I can't even speak anymore. Yanshan, Yaxin, look at this family. They're here to bully a widowed old lady. Zhao Shumi was trembling with anger. She was just about to blow up and break into an earth-shattering cry when Lan Anran interrupted her. Grandmother, your actions right now look just like an old woman from the countryside. This is how old women from the countryside quarrel. Do you still dare to look down on people from the countryside? Grandmother, don't be angry. Lan Anran spoke in a gentle voice. Zhao Shumi was so angry that her voice turned dark red and a bunch of words got choked up in her throat. Lan Yanran looked at his sister in surprise and admiration. She said what he had always wanted to say to the old lady. It was really refreshing to hear these words for the first time. Lan Yanran sat upright and didn't seem the least guilty or apologetic. Oh my goodness, is this really what I have for a granddaughter? Zhao Shumi was so angry she could only say these words. Chapter 10, Medical Research Institute. Seeing his mother gasping for breath, Lan Tingyang was afraid it might turn serious and wanted to persuade Lan Anran to hold her tongue. Of course, Lan Anran knew of her father's thoughts. Her father was a filial son. He would feel heartbroken if Zhao Shumi was even the slightest bit upset. It's all my fault, Grandmother. Grandma looks down on people from the countryside. We embarrass her. I have been living in the countryside since I was a child and don't know about manners, which caused me to accidentally offend Grandmother. Dad, you can hit or scold me. It's all my fault. Lan Anran used Lan Yaxin's trick. As the saying goes, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Those who complain the loudest gets the most attention. Seeing his daughter like this, Lan Tingyang couldn't bear to say anything. He could only stand in silence. Mom, it's not like that. Anran didn't mean that. Li Yuru stood and explained. She didn't mean it. Her wild manners were developed from 20 years in the countryside. She hadn't even been taught well. Zhao Shumi scolded angrily. Dad, I'm sorry. Lan Ran wiped her tears as she turned to leave. Lan Tingyun grabbed his daughter, seeing that his mother was deliberately picking on her. They hadn't seen each other for 20 years and didn't have feelings for each other. She had made a few jokes, but his mother made a big fuss, making things difficult for his daughter. She also looked down on his daughter and called her a country girl. This was indeed his mother's mistake. It's all right. Grandmother definitely likes you, but she's angry now, and her words are harsh. Lan Tingung pulled Lan and ran and hugged her. He was heartbroken as he patted her back comfortably. Lan and Ran nodded, but didn't say anything. Zhao Shumi was pale with anger, and Shu Yanshan kindly soothed her from the side. Just then she saw Lan Anran smile at her evilly. Enraged, she grabbed a cup by her side and smashed it at Lan Anran. Dad, be careful! Lan Anran swiftly dodged aside, and the cup smashed into a pillar behind her, breaking into pieces. Lan Tingyong looked at his mother in shock. Mom, how could you do that? Why can't I? I'm going to kill this unvile thing today. Look at this daughter you raised. She just returned and yet she dares to confront me. If your father was still alive, he would have never forgiven her. You're just bullying a widowed old woman. Bullying me because I don't have a husband. Do you think this is easy, raising you? How could you treat me like this? Lao Shumi choked as she spoke. Lan Tingyong saw his mother crying and his heart softened again. He remembered how difficult it was for his mother to bring him up, and he lowered his head in silence. Lan Ran couldn't help but pout when she saw Zhao Shumi. She thought about how her father trusted and cared for the old woman in her past life. Old Mrs. Lan only loved her eldest son, and in the end she forced her younger son to jump off a building while enjoying everything he had. The thought made her hatred grow. If her parents weren't here today, she would have dealt with this old lady. Dad, Mom, I think we should leave today. This isn't going anywhere. Lan Tingyong pulled Lan An Ran and turned to leave. Just then, Shu Yanshan suddenly spoke. Brother, sister-in-law, the old Mrs. Lan is a little hot-tempered today. You should sit down first. Shu Yanshan turned around and whispered to Zhao Shumi. Mom, don't be angry. It'll hurt your health. Have you forgotten the reason they are here? We haven't gotten matters settled yet. How could we let them go? Shu Yanshan's words reminded Zhao Shumi that she has called her second child's family over to discuss the marriage. She was so angry at the insolent girl that she almost forgot. Zhao Shumi turned around, suppressed the anger in her heart, and said in a cold voice, Since you're already here, have a meal before leaving. Zhao Shumi led the family into the dining table. Everyone focused on their food, and it was unusually quiet. Zhao Shumi took advantage of the meal to bring up the matter, so to dampen Anran's ignorance. Yaxin, you must get into Wrong City Medical Research Institute this year. The Lan family has to produce at least one outstanding talent. Everyone wants to enter the Wrong City Medical Research Institute, so you'll have to work hard and not let someone else steal your limelight. Everyone present knew that Lan Anran is the someone else she was referring to. Lan Tingyong's family naturally knew as well, but they didn't say anything. Lan Yaxin nodded confidently, her gaze turning toward Lan Anran. Don't worry, Grandma. I definitely will do so. Our Yaxin is the best. The Lan family is a medical family, and amongst the younger generation, there isn't anyone who can surpass our Yaxin. Yaxin's theoretical knowledge is excellent, and her medical attainments are very high. This is unlike a certain someone who boasted shamefully that she would succeed even though she doesn't know anything. It's such a joke, Yaxin. Don't learn from these people. They don't have the ability, and yet they manage to have the self-confidence. She will be an embarrassment to the Lan family. Shu Yaxin spoke in a cryptic tone, not naming anyone.